Hello and welcome, one and all, to my review of patch 14.1. As you probably know by now, Riot overhauled the items for this season, and as such, the meta has been quite shook up. Some clear winners and some clear losers have emerged, and there's a lot to cover. So in this video, I want to go over who those winners and losers are, why, and what impact this has had on the meta and will continue to have on the meta. I also want to quickly discuss the relatively minor changes that came along with this patch, which I think are more likely to impact pro play than solo queue. But for those interested, it might help explain why you're seeing some of the champions you're seeing. So, let's get started. First off, we have jungle damage adjustments. So what changed? Well, two things which are aiming to accomplish the same goal. First, the damage jungle pets do has been increased by quite a lot, from 15 flat to 20 to 90, depending on level. Additionally, the damage amp champions receive to non-epic monsters has been nerfed by an equally sizable amount, from 42% down to 25%. The effect of these changes is flattening the clear speeds of all jungle champions. Think of a high clear speed jungler like Graves, who relies heavily on his own damage to clear. He is now probably just a little bit slower. Now, think of a slow clear speed jungler like Maokai, who takes time to clear just a single camp. Well, the longer it takes you to clear a camp, the more damage your pet can contribute, effectively ramping up your clear speed actually. So, you can see how a slow jungler gets a little bit faster and a fast jungler gets just a little bit slower. This means that the overall clear speed, the average clear speed of all junglers, is now a tighter, narrower, flatter window, and more predictable on average. This is one of those changes that I expect to affect pro play far more than solo queue, but its impact will be felt by all junglers no doubt. And the reason I say that this affects pro play more is that timing junglers is simply now more consistent. Moving on to item changes. Now, for this section, I want to focus on the biggest impact items. With so many changes to the item system, there's too much to cover every single one, and frankly, not all of them are worth mentioning. I'm also not really going to discuss components at this time, since they are usually just flat stats or have passives that most players don't feel the impact of. So, with that out of the way, let's take a look at the items which have rocked the boat the most and which champions are most affected. First, let's take a look at the top 3 highest and lowest win rate champions on this patch per position with over 75,000 games played. In the top lane, our highest win rate champions currently are Mordekaiser, Trundle, and Singed, while our lowest are Renekton, Cassante, and Volibear. In the jungle, Teemo, Lilia, and Jax are currently the highest win rate, while Sylas, Nidalee, and Gragas are the lowest. Mid lane is currently dominated by Fizz, Swain, and Diana, while Hui, LeBlanc, and Zoe suffer. The bot position is currently seeing a lot of Seraphine, Misfortune, and Nilo wins, while traditional ADCs like Zeri, Kai'Sa, and Ezreal are losing. Support is rounded out by Teemo, Maokai, and Taric with the highest win rate, and Wei, Karma, and Yuumi at the lowest end. Now, let's take a look at the items and see how these relate to our selected champions. This will largely be in the order that the patch notes were in because I formulated most of my thoughts on the item changes as I was reading through them. So, let's start with mage items. The losers in this category are Luden's Companion and Archangel's/Seraph's Embrace. Luden's lost its magic penetration component, and Seraph's gained too little in stats to make it viable on anybody who wasn't building it before anyway. Now, you could make a case for Hextech Rocket Belt, but that's largely due to it losing its status as a mythic, and therefore being nerfed accordingly. However, its cost was also slashed, and as we will see in a moment, its synergy with the biggest winner of the mage category, namely Storm Surge, means that it is not only viable as a first item still, it's also one of the best sources of ability haste, which has become harder to stack. Other winners in the mage category are Malignance and Riftmaker. The biggest change to Riftmaker, which, despite also losing its status as a mythic item, still comes as a buff to the item overall, which is that AoE abilities now heal for the full amount. And the top Riftmaker users all have crazy AoE abilities. Now, looking over to our leaderboard, what do we see? Fizz rushes Storm Surge, Swain, Malignance, and Diana, Rocket Belt. All 3 of our losers rush Ludens. Yes, they may build Storm Surge as a second item, but because there's no mana component on Storm Surge, spell slinging control mages are simply unable to rush it and are suffering for it. Up next, according to Riot, are fighter and diver items, where our loser is just about every item because the fighter class as a whole is just not doing well right now. My initial read on the changes had Spear of Shojin as a loser and Experimental Hexplate as the winner. But with AP Bruisers dominating thanks to the mage item changes, we'll just have to wait and see which items and champions emerge top in their class when these mage items are inevitably nerfed. Moving on to tanks and support tank items. Again, our winners and losers are warped by the dominance of AP right now, but we do see the emergence of Trailblazer and Locket for Maokai and Taric, respectively. Trailblazer facilitates early roaming by granting 5% plus 20 flat move speed, which is especially useful when you're trying to get to those void grubs, and having a CC bot like Maokai present for those early game skirmishes no doubt contributes to his dominance right now. Hui and Karma and other mage supports are suffering from the same problem as I mentioned before, which is that they can't rush Storm Surge. And Yuumi is just bad. In the AD Assassin category, we have a whole host of changes, including a buff to lethality, which I have not heard many people talking about yet. Previously, lethality scaled from 0.6 to 1 armor penetration per level. Now, it's 1-to-1 from the start, meaning early lethality is worth more than it was before. Surprisingly, this has had a bigger impact on which ADCs are dominant than which assassins. If we take another look at our leaderboards, the two real ADCs which win out are Misfortune and Neela, who both use lethality to great effect, and our losers are those champions whose items arguably changed the least. As for the actual item changes, the biggest loss in my opinion is the reliability of the slow on Cyrilda's Grudge. It only slows targets below 50% HP and gives less percent penetration overall. The biggest win for assassins, and I think this will only rise in popularity as people understand how powerful it can be, is the Profane Hydra. I won't get into the numbers here, but it provides some of the highest haste, AD, biggest damage amp active, while helping wave clear to enable more roaming, which is of course what assassins want to be doing. Because non-lethality marksmen simply aren't in a good place right now, it's hard to justify any winners in this category either, but I do think that on-hit marksmen, with Enchanter supports, will be back in the meta soon. This is for two reasons. The first is the changes to the interaction between Kraken Slayer and Guinsoo's Rageblade. This buff means champions who could build these two items well can once again shred through enemies. That alone won't be enough to shift the needle, however. On top of that, the biggest support item change, in my opinion, is the ridiculous buffs to Art and Sensor. Art was buffed in every way. More AP, more mana regen, more move speed, more attack speed, more on-hit damage, more. My expectation is that champions like Kalista, Ashe, and Kai'Sa, coupled with Lulu, Janna, and Nami, are likely to dominate the pro scene in the next few weeks, even if they're not doing well in solo queue. Before ending this patch review, I want to go over some other item changes which don't rock the boat, but just feel good to have. So this will be our honorable mentions section. First off, Horizon Focus. The Focus passive is new, and revealing enemy champions every 30 seconds is unlikely to be seen as super valuable by most players, but it'll feel good when it happens. Next up is Seeker's Armguard, which has been bundled with Stopwatch to now have Stasis, but you don't have to stack it anymore to get the stats, so it's the new Stopwatch. Up next, Crypt Bloom. To me, this is a sleeper item, just like Profane Hydra. You have 30% magic penetration compared to Void Staff's 40%, but in exchange for that, you get 10 haste and a healing burst for your team when someone dies. With haste being more rare now, I expect this item to pick up steam as the patch goes on. Next, Morellonomicon. Now this one's interesting because it was gutted stat-wise, but also Chemtrek Putrefier has been removed, and Morellonomicon is 800 gold cheaper. So this means this is the go-to Grievous Wounds item for mage supports, while true mage carries don't really have a good option now. Up next, Sterix Gauge. It now gives 20% flat tenacity, which makes it a lot easier to access this tenacity, and you don't have to wait for the shield to pop. This doesn't change who the item is good and bad on, but it's an improvement nonetheless. After that, and our last mention of the video, is Warmog's Armor, which now gives 5% permanent move speed, plus another 10% out of combat, making it much better at encouraging the playstyle that it's actually built for, which is engage, disengage, heal up, and re-engage with your health advantage. Anyway, that's all I have for you today. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you learned something. I'm your host, Miss Muffin Man, and this has been another entry into the League Encyclopedia. Feel free to suggest other topics you'd like a deeper dive on, and let me know if anything was unclear.